Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Charlotte Motor Speedway, but not for the oval, but for the ROVAL. We're going to be dealing with the road course at Charlotte. I'm actually recording this before either the Xfinity or the Cup race, so it'll be interesting to see how the racing there corresponds to the racing in the game. I know there are differences in the track layout, particularly at the end of the course, but it's very fun. Nonetheless, we're going to be talking about the track itself a little bit. We're going to be talking about the setup that I use here at this track. We'll talk a little bit about lap times, all that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, before we get started with discussion of lap times and the setup itself, let's talk a little bit about the track. The track itself is very tricky and can be very treacherous. There are numerous spots to get yourself in a lot of trouble on this particular track, but the biggest thing to keep in mind when we get into lap times and the handling of the car is you're going to have to make a decision at this track on how aggressive you're going to be in the chicanes, particularly with the ability to cut the chicanes that the game allows you with no penalties. You can make up multiple seconds quite easily by hitting those chicanes just right and cutting those and really not respecting the track surface itself. So I want to start off by saying that's not the way I've designed this setup. It is not optimized to cut those chicanes and make maximum lap time. That's not what I designed it for. Also, it's not a qualifying setup. I made this setup for long races, and I needed it to be steady and stable over a long period of time, not just run one or two hot laps. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about lap times. My quicker laps are in the 112 range, with most of my laps, consistent laps, in the probably 112.6 to about 113 flat range in general. That's pretty normal for me. Again, you can get faster than that if you want to get more aggressive with the chicanes, but somewhere in the mid to upper minute 12 range is pretty good for a consistent lap, again, bleeding into the minute 13 seconds, just depending on how well you hit some of the curves. Now, the track itself, going into turn one, just after the start-finish line, the hard braking into turn one, where you enter the infield course, is really bumpy, so you have to be careful about how aggressive you get getting in there. The best thing to do is to have the steering wheel either straight or as close to straight as you're making that transition, and laps on the track will teach you exactly what I'm referring to here better than I can just explain it in a video. But try to keep the wheel as straight as possible going through there, and that will allow you to get through there without a whole lot of issue. Now, the infield section itself, turns 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 can really be taken as one corner each. So 3 and 4 are, you can look at them essentially as one corner with a double apex. Same thing when you get over to 5 and 6. You can essentially look at those as a single corner with a double apex if you want to. Don't necessarily have to, but that's an easy way to think of it. A huge focus for you on this lap should be the final corner coming out of the chicane. I don't remember all of the numbers. It depends on how you want to label these things. But the final corner that takes you from the infield back onto the oval in what would be oval turn 1 is extremely important to get the power down as quickly as you can. And in order to do that, you need to get the car rotated. So it's important to try to get the apex there just right. Get off the gas, let the car rotate, and then get back into the gas as quickly as you can and extend that long period, because you're not going to lift once you're going through oval turns 1 and 2 on the banking. You're not going to have to lift there until you get to the backstretch chicane. Now, the backstretch chicane can be run very, very aggressively. Again, I've not set up to do that. I'll let you guys get more aggressive with the setup if you so desire. But you don't have to worry about it. The main thing is in the backstretch chicane is it's not a heavy braking area at all. In fact, just a light tap to the brakes is all you would need, if anything. You can actually get through there without touching the brakes at all. It's possible to get through there without going down into third gear if you want. But again, I didn't design this setup to be quite that aggressive with it. I've designed this setup to run it more like what the AI run it. But I can tell you that you will be much faster through there than the AI when you are at full speed, even if you are shifting down to third and using the brakes a little bit there. So be wary of the AI around that backstretch chicane, as they are much slower than they need to be and much slower than what you would expect them to be through that part of the course. So the main part through there is to get slowed down just enough on corner that you can get the car turned. And once you get it rotated, you can basically drive straight through and come out the other side with a lot of speed, heading down into the front stretch and getting back to what would be the front stretch part of the oval. Now, when you come into the final chicane, that's a real big time maker for you, depending on how aggressive you want to be with it. If you choose to respect the track limits, much like what they have to do in real life because of those turtles and other things, then you're going to be slower in some cases by a second, 2 seconds, maybe even 3 seconds, depending on how conservative you are with your line through there. I can tell you that my line through there actually makes me go through there a little bit slower than the AI. So I'm trying not to be overly aggressive through that area, just to sort of respect the spirit of the track. With that in mind, and a brief description of the track itself, and again, more of that will make sense as you run laps on the track. You will start to understand what I mean by how bumpy it is as you go through turn 1 and turn 2 and really get into the infield and so on. All of that will start to make a lot more sense as you get more laps on the track. So let's turn our discussion now to the setup itself. And this setup, I use basically the same, if not identical, setups between the Xfinity and the Cup cars. There are tweaks you can do because the Xfinity car is so much easier to drive, so much less horsepower and so on, that there are tweaks you can do to make it even better above this particular setup. But if you want to use the same in both series, you'll be just fine. We'll start with the shock settings, and I'm using a little bit higher numbers on the shocks in the front of the car as opposed to the rear of the car. That's just for a little bit of stability and to tighten up the car just a little bit. So 5 and 7 on bump and rebound in the front, 3 and 5 in the rear, but there is plenty of adjustability there, just depending on how you want the car to behave and how quickly you want it to react. Left side weight I've left at 50%, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't gain some speed by adjusting that to one side or another, just depending on which corners you want to maximize. Front weight for stability purposes is at 53%. This setup is designed to be a long run setup, and it's designed to be a stable setup. So there is time to be gained if you reduce that front weight, simply because it will allow the car to rotate a little bit better. Wedge, just like with the left side weight, the wedge is at 50%, although you could adjust that a little bit to help you in left-handers or right-handers. The front and rear ride heights are both at 4 inches. Let's move over to the springs, and this was pretty simple for me. This is what I wanted to be able to do, and it turned out the setup allowed me to do just that. I wanted to use the maximum springs, 1,200 on the front springs, 600 on the rear springs. And the reason for that is I wanted to really cut down on the amount of body roll that you get on the road courses. And using the stiffest springs that I can allows me to do that to the greatest degree, and the car feels really stable. I can actually hustle the car without worrying about so much body roll that it wants me to spin out. That, in combination with the front sway bar that we'll talk about in just a second, really gives the car a good feel for me, and much better than I had in NASCAR Heat 2. So I'm very happy about that. Tire settings, 29 on the front, 26 in the rear. The rear tires, the air pressure there is a good way to adjust the handling of the car, particularly during the race. If you find that you're just not able to get the power down as much as you would like coming off the corner, then drop those rear air pressures by anything from a half pound to a full pound or more, depending on how bad, and that can really help you to get some bite off those corners. But anywhere in the 26, 27 range for the rear, 29, 30, maybe even 28 for the front, just depending on on how you want the car to handle. Moving over to the miscellaneous settings. Now with the camber here, you have several options. I've had good results down as low as 3 or 4 on the front camber and as high as about 7, 5 to 7, anywhere in that range. It's all about the feel that you want and how quickly you want the car to rotate. So I'm giving it to you guys at 7 degrees of camber on the front, which is about the maximum that I run at this track. Front sway bar is at 1.5 inches, which is 3 or 4 steps higher than what I normally run on the ovals. And the reason I did that is the bigger the diameter front sway bar you use, the tighter and more stable the car will be. So as I mentioned with the front weight, if you want to reduce the front sway bar, that will allow the car to roll more, a lot more body roll left to right going through these corners, which I'm not a particular fan of. I want to reduce that as much as I can. But by reducing that front sway bar, you can get the car to rotate much better through the corners, and you can pick up some speed that way if you so desire. The rear sway bar can be used for a similar purpose, but I've gotten accustomed to adjusting my setups without the rear sway bar, but that by no means means that it's not a viable tool to adjust the car. Moving on to the track bar itself, I'm using 8 inches on both the left and the right side. And I use the track bar here just to help out with the overall rotation. I'm using a very low number here at 8 inches, which I think 6 inches is actually the bottom. And I'm doing that so that I can get the best bite off the corners. I want the most grip coming off the corners. And if anything, I want the car to be a little bit tight when I get back to the throttle, because that will allow me to play with the throttle a little bit and get the car to turn the way I need it to. But if you increase that track bar on both sides, that will certainly make the car rotate a little bit better and can help you out if you need some help getting through the corners faster. Brake bias, I've had good luck with anything from about 65 to about 75 here at this track. The higher the brake bias, the tighter the car will be, and the more it will want to go straight under heavy braking. So if you like to turn the car while you're braking, then you'll probably want to run a little bit lower number. Grill tape, not a huge issue here. Just make sure that you don't get so aggressive that you overheat the engine. So 35% was fine for me. I don't think even adjust that from the default setting. Wheel lock is at 10 degrees and no steering offset. Now the wheel lock is something that you definitely can play with at this track, and it can help out or really hurt the feel of the car for you. And you just have to determine how quickly you want the car to turn and how quickly and aggressive you want the wheel to be as you are making your turn in and exit of the corner and small adjustments. The higher the number you use on the wheel lock, the more aggressive or the quicker the steering is going to be. So if you're looking to make the car rotate a little bit better, then one of the things you can try is increasing that wheel lock, and that will certainly make the car turn a little bit quicker, particularly on corner entry. Now down to the gear settings, I did play around with these just a little bit so that I could, particularly through the infield section, get the gearing so that I didn't have to make as many gear changes through there. I know in real life they're using second gear throughout the entire infield section, and I wanted to get close to that, if not at that. And I think I've done a pretty good job of that. So first gear is at 2.6, second gear 1.5, third gear 1.2, and then finally fourth gear I left at 1.0 with a rear end ratio of 3.7. There's plenty of room for adjustability there, just depending on how you want to use the gears. This is a very fun track for me to race at. I didn't have a whole lot of fun in the road courses in NASCAR Heat 2 because I couldn't find a feel out of the car that I wanted. This gives me a much better feel and much more ability to attack whenever I want to attack, and much more stability than what I was finding in the previous game. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you can take some of these settings and help you make your own setup for the Charlotte ROVAL. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more as we continue our NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming.